is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Resistance Rising, a genre wars novel by Robin Farrell. Guess what, guys? She's here with me on the show. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. My name is Natasha.
I'm Robin. I'm Robin. I'm the author of Resistance Rising.
So, very, very, very welcome to the show. I'm delighted to have you, and this is like so cool to have somebody who actually wrote what I'm covering. And for those of you who are interested in following along, I provided a link in the show notes for purchasing the book. And we are covering this episode, the prologue and chapters 1 through 5. So, ma'am, tell me about yourself. How did you get started with this? You are a co-author, and I don't know how that works with working with other people on this. Tell me about the process of writing this.
So this project had a really Frankenstein origin in that it actually, so I actually have more of a filmmaking background. That's what I went to college for. That's what I've been doing for a long time. But, my day job is I'm a video editor. And this actually started as the Genre Wars online film competition. That's where the story started. And then that evolved into an independent web series because when I joined the contest, even though I'm in film, like my interest was always in story and screenwriting and script supervising and that sort of stuff. So I got involved he was putting together a team.
Mm-hmm.
On set because the contest was mostly interested in like taking different genre types, personifying them, and then having a fight for cinematography and special effects and that sort of thing. And then that evolved into but Justin had all these really big ideas, like, just world building type stuff. And I was kind of like, this is good. This is really interesting. I find this really compelling, like way more than just, basically another take on Deadliest Warrior, but with a very minor storyline. Mm-hmm. And so we started developing these characters and the story, and then that became an independent web series, which is in post-production right now. But as it's been in post-production, I decided to adapt the screenplay that I wrote. Justin, and the co-author thing is that Justin and I co-wrote the story together. We kind of would hash out episodes, and then I would actually take what we developed, and then I would write that as an episode, actually write the script. So at the end of that process, I decided to, basically adapt those episodes into prose, which I hadn't done that in a long time. So it was really interesting to kind of go back to that, because before my interest in film started, I was definitely thought I was going to be a novelist. So, but mm-hmm. Life is funny that way. So
tell me about it. So, this story is set in tell me the name of the planet. I don't feel like we actually get a specific name in the opening. We had the prologue. We are with a Mr. X character. Mm-hmm. And he is trying to steal this object called the Omnium. Is that how you say that? The Onium. Onium.
Mm-hmm.
Onium. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like an orb that seems to provide like excellent luck and prosperity and peace to whomever is not just guarding it, because it's different like groups and guilds that guard it, but also the people like nearest to it seem to be affected personally by it also. Mm-hmm. And this prologue, spoiler alert, this dude does not know what he is in for at all in terms of trying to steal this thing. It does not go well. So I can't obviously ask for spoilers, even though I kind of want to find out what happens to this. But because it seems like he freely admits, like in his POV, that he studied with like necromancers and dark magic users, trying to find every possible means of ensuring that this mission that he's on is a success. So this is not a scrupulous person. It's surprising to me that he wants the Omnium, because it feels like the antithesis of what he seems to be after as a person, like in that it offers peace and like a feeling, a sense of like contentment. And he doesn't seem interested in that. It's merely the power and the success that supposedly comes with owning it that he seems interested in. Does that seem right?
Yeah. The thing about Mr. X is that he's both somebody who is, he's both very interested in just sheer power, but also he's curious. I mean, he makes a comment in the prologue about, no one's ever actually just tried to take it. I mean, the Omnium serves as basically a checks and balances in this world, as far as like keeping, and that's peace, his power, and no one's ever tried to take it. Like, well, what would happen if I try to do that? So it's a desire for power, but it's also this, he's also really curious, like, okay, so what would happen? Mm-hmm. And he's willing to take that risk.
Yeah, so it becomes pretty clear why nobody has tried to do this. There's the Omnium, first of all, reacts to him trying to take it with what I can only describe as defiance. Like, it begins to fight back sonically. There's like a sound that it's emitting and is like aware of what he's trying to do. So the Omnium reacts to what's near it, which I found really interesting. It's like it's sentient in its way. Mm-hmm.
It's definitely sentient.
And so I imagine it just doing the like, Morpheus, like, come at me kind of hand as he's coming towards it. When he tries to grab it, it basically, it feels like something has exploded against his face, but it doesn't, like, he's not bleeding. There's no actual injury. It just that's the sensation that he experiences, but it doesn't seem like that's actually what happened. And I should mention that this guy has enough magic that when like the guards try and come at him, he can just, and they just fly into the walls. And are they dead or are they just knocked out?
They're dead.
Yeah, I thought, okay, that's harsh.
There was actually, and the original version of the prologue actually went through a lot of different versions. Trying to get into the story, trying to set up everything was probably the hardest part of writing this book, because, like in the prologue, you hear about the Jalorian Knights. They come up a couple times through the book as a whole, but not much. But they, like, before this version came around, the prologue was actually two Jalorian. It was written from the point of view of one Jalorian knight, and two of them are there, and they're looking at the two guards that are still there. But yeah, so they're dead.
Gotcha. Yeah, and he says something about the Jalorian Knights, and that like if they were the ones guarding the place, then he's not sure he would have done this. But it's just two ordinary dudes who are just assigned because nobody's worried about somebody taking it because this is just not something people do. So they're not. It's not on their radar. So when he grabs it, I'm gonna read this. His fingers brushed the surface of the orb. It convulsed as though struck. With a deafening crack, it transformed. Back in its natural state as an enormous crystal, it was far larger, all rough surface and jagged edges. Mid-reach, the floor trembled beneath his feet. A matching pulse rolled beneath his fingertip and inside his chest. The light shifted again, plunging the room into a deep scarlet. The screech returned, and with a lurch of horror, Mr. X saw a crack appear in the crystal. Then another and another. Self-destruction. In a last desperate reach, his fingers closed around one of those jagged edges. The room exploded. So yeah, then his face is burning and he feels like, it feels like a bunch of glass like tore up his face, but it's not actually bleeding. And he sees all of these like flashes in time pass before his eyes, as if he's almost getting the perspective of the crystal. Like it's him seeing everything that the crystal was there for itself, is my going theory here. And that it's like, I really liked this line. The expanse of centuries compressed into a heartbeat and single moments stretched into a lifetime. Events throughout all of history swept in and out of his mind's eye, each with a different mental lash. He was all of them, every victim, every victor, and he knew all of their stories. He couldn't stand the enormity of it, feeling everything at once. So he opens his eyes and he can feel that something is going on in his right eye, that there's pain there. It's not as bad as it was before. So he's kind of wondering if maybe everything is fine after all, but there is a like red haze over everything. And he looks into a piece of metal at his reflection and he realizes that his skin is like transformed. Like he looks different. He looks elfin is the word that he uses. And there is a dull pulse emanating from his eye socket. So it's in his eyeball. It took the place of his eye, right? It just like went into. So maybe, okay. So nobody, is this the first time somebody has like physically grabbed it before? Like, how does this thing get transported normally? Or is that a spoiler?
It's not exactly. Okay. It's normally transported like they and it depends on which, for lack of a better term, which genre, which tribe, which kingdom is actually doing the transporting. Like if it's the mechs, or if it's one of the more industrial cultures, it's going to be transported more like we would transport some like crown jewels. That's kind of like, I think, even though it's sentient, they treat it like it's this relic, right? So they normally transport it with a lot of care, but no one really touches it. It never even really gets touched much, unless really since it was first found. So
yeah, I feel like it takes a special kind of arrogance to touch something that's like super powerful and floating and glowing. That's not something that I'm excited to touch.
well, and even like I said, if you think of it as something like the crown jewels, or like even our historical documents, like the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, like it doesn't get physically touched by, I mean, hardly anybody, if anyone at all. It's usually handled with gloves and with extreme care, because it's partly too because this thing is old. I mean, it's an old thing, so it's, and usually until it transforms back into a crystal, it's usually a different shape depending on, again, who's caretaking it.
Interesting. Yeah, I found that to be surprising too. Like its natural state is a crystal, which implies that there's others like it, or that it comes from somewhere, that there might be more of the material that it is made out of, like it was mined from somewhere. Or it could be a piece of crystal that somebody imbued with power. Like there are a few different directions that you can go with that. So yeah, the light is like shuddering, and he touches it and says shh, and it like calms down, which is crazy to me. And then he's perhaps the most momentous event in history had just taken place, but the world slept on unaware. His hands tingled. He had fought the Omnium and won. And this leads to a war, because everybody who is supposed to be in charge of keeping control of this thing and trading it amongst each other because we find out later that the omnium like dims after a given period of time, and they then recognize that it's time for it to move on to another group of hosts for it, and they pass it on. Oh my God, Phantasarians, thank you, which is a pretty clever name. I enjoy. They are suspected of having stolen it.
I think Justin came up with that. I know I didn't. It was either the term Phantasarian, I believe, was Justin came up with that.
I like that. So the next chapter begins with Riemann, who is on a like recon mission to investigate an area where there was an explosion and figure out as much as he can, because they all like apparently everybody seems to think that the Phantasarians stole this, which I don't really know what evidence there is of that, except that it supposed to be in there. I forget what are the soldiers who are guarding it when this Mr. X comes to steal it. Phantasarian is in their custody. So people think that they had custody of it and then they refused to like give it up when they were supposed to and are hiding it now, is the theory, right?
Mm-hmm. There's a line later in the novel, I forget which chapter it's in, but a character that by chapter 5, based on what you've read, you haven't met this character yet, mm-hmm. but she says it disappeared in their territory during their rule. So it's kind of like, well, you're the last ones to have had it, right. So it had to be you, and you know their whole stance is basically what you just said, like, but that's not really enough for us to, you know, how do you know? It could have been anybody else, you know, they could have snuck in, which is basically what they did. Cause that's the world. It's gone. It's just disappeared.
So,
and no one knows.
Is this blast site that he's going to investigate the spot where it was taken from, or is this long enough, like further on, that that it's like a blast site from a different battle?
This is a totally different place. The blast site was caused by a missile from mercenaries, from the Mercs. Okay. It's several years later. It's about 5 years after that. Cool. But yeah, it's total. One of another adaptive choice that I struggled with writing the book was the blast that they're talking about is actually the first episode. You actually see the fight that leads to it. Okay. So for a long time, and that was actually the launch point. That was sort of the initial step that way back in the contest, it was they had filmed this fight sequence and then said, okay, now you go ahead. And where we picked the story up from there was basically what chapter 1 is in the book, which is Riemann going in. And I remember I had several drafts of a version of that fight written, like starting right before it, starting in the middle of it, starting right as it's starting. And I remember one of my beta readers said, why don't you just start where you started? You know, you're part of the story. Why don't you just start with Riemann? Because to me, really, that is where the actual story takes place. Right. That's really where that part starts. And that's really what I was interested in. It was always like writing that battle sequence was always just the means to an end, to get us to when Riemann shows up, since he is basically our protagonist. Yeah,
that makes sense. 'Cause that is one of those tricky things as an author of like, how much do you guys need to see of all of this extra stuff? And that's something that like I got really critical of when I was covering Dark Tower with Miles, that like King just loves to give us extra information about background shit that we did not need to know. Like maybe him as an author needs to know that, but it's not necessary for us to like sift through all of it to find the few pieces that are even relevant. Not to say like this sounds much more relevant than the stuff that King does, but it's hard to know because it's like really important to pacing. And and hooking people, especially when it's the first like episode. So
well, and it's great in like, it totally belongs in the web series. Like, it absolutely does belong there because it's so visual, and it says all the stuff about the war and everything that Riemann's thinking about without having to, they don't have to say any of that. So a lot of writing the book was me kind of fighting, even like, or wrestling with my film instincts, like, me going, but this worked so well on screen. I don't know how to get this onto the page. Like, so that was that, because normally it's the other way around. I've done a lot with adapting prose to script before. I had never done it the other way, writing from visual to prose. This was the first time I'd ever tried that. So it was a lot of this process was figuring out, okay, it worked visually, but it's, realizing it's not working in prose. So I need to make it, and of course feeling like I'm like betraying even myself, in all the work that we did visually, because like I have to make adaptation, and I don't know how to do that, and I feel like I shouldn't, but ultimately it worked a lot better.
Yeah, that is something that like I understand feeling like a purist as a reader when you see your favorite books adapted, but there are certain things that just don't translate well, and. Or like, even I was talking with Rashawn yesterday because I've been reading the Sookie Stackhouse series, which is like very fluffy and fun. And the True Blood TV show in some ways is super, super similar. And in many ways they've gone in a very different direction. And one of the biggest changes they've made is they've given Sookie friends. She doesn't really have any in the books. But in the books, you can have her internal monologue and know what's happening. And in the show, she needs people to be talking to explain all of this. So they have to give her people to talk to, even though she's like kind of an outcast in the books. And it's just those kinds of changes that are like when you first come into it as somebody who's a huge fan of something and is really attached to the original, you're just like, well, what the hell is this? But it's a totally different version of telling the story, and you have to get across the same information without the same tools. So that makes sense. That would be because then you have to like butcher your own work. It feels like, I'm sure, and stitch it back together again. So I can see why you used the Frankenstein analogy when we started. So Riemann is he's investigating this area, and he sees something that gets his attention and decides that he's going to get off of his ship, because he had been going to land somewhere, but there's something that's like on his radar that like sort of draws him out, and he winds up getting out and sensing that there's a couple things that it's really quiet. And he's like a city guy. So that seems to sort of make him uneasy. Like, I think, this is his first mission, or is it like just his first, like kind of important mission? It's his first mission, period.
It's his first solo mission. And he's never like, all the like few missions that he has done as part of a squad, he's never gotten outside the ship before. So Gotcha. This is really new for him. Yeah, he's very green. And he's only, and I think it's in the first chapter, he mentions how he's only been in I-Corps and I-Corps is the mech military force.
Right.
He's only been there for, I think he says like 18 months. I should know. I did write it, but he's only been there for a very, very short period of time.
You did write it, but there's a lot to keep track of with stuff like this, and I don't blame you a tiny bit. So I'm getting strange readings from a clearing up ahead, but only in fragments, probably interference from all the magic in the area. And magic is capitalized and italicized. So this is like a very specific thing. I'm leaving the mech to proceed on foot for further investigation. I will report my findings at 800 hours, switching to mobile link. So he heads out, and he sees two elves. And this is something that I didn't expect because, I mean, I know that in the prologue he says that he looks elfin, but nevertheless, the mix of having elves and like a lot of creatures that are associated with high fantasy and then the sci-fi aspect of these ships and like laser guns and everything was a really fun mix that I wasn't expecting at all. I'm sure this is done, you know, but it's not like I'm not well read enough or haven't like delved deeply enough into genre fiction to have encountered a lot of it. So the opening with the orb and somebody trying to steal it and him being like, oh, I look elfin, really felt like a particular type of fiction. And then to start off this one where he's like, you know, scanning a battle area and he's in a ship and has like comm links and all of this stuff. It was really surprising to have those things juxtaposed. So these elves that he thinks outwitting because they have not seemed to have noticed him. It turns out they are just very confident that the other person who is with them is going to be able to take him down. So they are not worried about him. He is not outwitting these elves as he seems to believe. And he gets jumped by a girl. What is her name? I'm trying to find it again. Cythera, thank you. And she has a knife to his throat. And we get some hints at this, like in these 5 chapters, that she has really seen some shit. Like, she has gone through some stuff that he couldn't understand. Like, even explaining it to him, she's not interested in having this conversation when Lethrin, is that his name? Legren. When he tries to like bring up her family, she's like, you're not going to talk about my family to try and convince this guy. You don't use them like that, which I kind of liked. What were you going to say about?
It's funny because it seems like something that I'm not sure how, maybe I decided consciously, but something one of my favorite authors is Stephen Brust, and he actually has a pronunciation guide at the front of one of his books. I think actually might be multiple books in this series, and I actually had a pronunciation guide that I almost left in the manuscript, and for some reason I took it out, or I forgot it, or it got accidentally taken out, but I really wish it had been in there. But it is interesting because most people who aren't familiar with the web series, who haven't heard his name said a bunch, tend to think that it's Legren, which is interesting. But I remember when we were filming, someone said, Ledrin, Excedrin over a ledge. Okay. For some reason. That's always stuck in my head.
Yeah,
but
I really like as I have said, I've obviously never have had like the author of something I'm covering on with me. So it's really nice to actually be able to ask you how they're supposed to be pronounced instead of just being like, I hope I'm getting this right. How do you guys say it? Which is often how it works in this chat.
Right.
'Cause I mean, even things like you can argue that somebody said it this way and that way in the audiobook, but if you are familiar with Song of Ice and Fire, there are 2 different versions of the audiobooks, and Daenerys is pronounced completely differently in both of them, which has led to fights between me and Miles because he says it Daenerys, which is ridiculous and wrong. And he needs to know that, Miles. So he's still like, he'll still say her name like that just to like really irritate me because he knows it's like nails on a chalkboard to me, Daenerys. No.
Well, and it's not like... Well, it's not like something like Hermione, which I remember the Harry Potter fandom, like when the books are first coming out, a lot of people didn't know the correct pronunciation of Hermione's name.
I had never seen that name in my life.
That's an actual name. Yeah, me neither. But by the time I got to Harry, I'm a huge this year, but like there's like I remember I didn't get to the Harry Potter fandom until I was 14 when Goblet of Fire had just come out. So by that point, the movies were coming out, and like, so I knew what her name was all along. But I remember hearing about that later, like Hermione, like people didn't know how to say her name.
But again, like
it's a real name, you know?
I think in Goblet is when she is saying how to pronounce it to Crumb. And that
that too.
book came out. That book came out, I think, before the movies started to come out. Like maybe it was like right around then that the movies had started to be released. I don't remember, but that reading it was the first time that I got any idea, and I realized like how wrong I had been. I don't even think I had settled on a pronunciation in my head as I was reading, to be honest. I feel like every time I came across her name, it was a little different because I just really had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
So once Crumb like gets like handheld led through how to say her name, I was like, you know what, Hermione, thank you. And I wish that you'd done that sooner.
Mm-hmm.
So he gets jumped and she has pointed ears and everything. He knows that she is an elf. She takes his rifle and his comm and his pistol and everything. And they're in the middle of like figuring out like what they're going to do with him, marching him away, when a missile explodes near them. We don't find out who shot at them, do we? Or where this came from in these 5 chapters?
Yeah, well, Riemann did it. He's like messing with his wrist thing.
Oh, that was a response to that. Okay, I got you. Yeah. So that was him trying to like make an escape for himself, but instead he like wound up knocking himself out, and it did not do what he had hoped for.
He almost does. He almost gets away.
Bless him. He tried so hard.
Kinda.
He ran faster. When he skidded into the clearing, he scanned the surroundings. He saw no sign of the girl. And then he gets hit by an arrow, which is like on fire. At least it's it's flaming light is the way he is describing it. And then, he goes down. And when he wakes up, he is not in like a friggin' dungeon or God knows what he expected. He's on a cot in a warm room, having been tended to. His injury was seen to. There is a fire, and there are people in the room very relaxed, like having something to eat and playing cards practically. Like just, This is obviously not the situation that he expected to wake to. And because of that, it makes him more suspicious rather than otherwise, because he is a suspicious person. He has been indoctrinated with a certain perspective on who these people are. And despite being presented with constant evidence that his perspective is incorrect, he really clings to that a lot. So this is the introduction that we get to Ledrin. Say it again.
Ledrin, that's right.
Okay, cool. I got it. Ledrin, and there's a Viking with him, Boza.
Yep. Bosa, yep.
Bosa is somebody that I really would like to get to know better. Pretty much say the word Viking, and I'm like, what? Where? I'm a fan. I'm pretty sure that Bosa is not supposed to be Ragnar Lothbrok levels of hotness, if anybody watches that show Vikings, but I can picture him however I want. Thank you very much, everybody. So I will. And Ledrin calls him Falcon because that's, I guess, his code name.
That's his call. That's Freeman's call sign.
I kind of want that to be his name. I kind of want him to take that on, like, forever.
That just kind of gives me an idea for something. Maybe further down. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, that's actually really an interesting idea.
I did something, guys. So when they are like, oh, maybe that's not your name. Is it Riemann? And he like clearly flinches and they're like, aha, that's it. That's his name. There is a moment here where they get like, they're in the middle of trying to like tell him that they're working on healing him and they're trying to take care. And obviously he's not hearing any of this. And then this messenger comes in and they open Cythera's reading it over Ledrin's shoulder. And he says vampians, and she says, and mobsters, and I'm dying to know what that is about. Like, please tell me it's a race of people who are pinstriped and like born with Tommy guns in their hands, because like at their puberty, they're like given a fedora as their like rite of passage.
Well, sort of. You're kind of half right. One thing that we had actually talked about doing in the series, if we continued to do a second or third season, we had actually talked about doing a thing where, because when the contest was still going on, when the Genre Wars contest was still going on, there was a submission that actually had mobsters as one of the genres, and the filmmaker, he's an insane visual effects artist. Like, he's insanely talented with that, and he did a lot of the stuff for our web series too. Aaron Rosine is his name, and he did he actually rotoscoped all of the mobsters to all be in black and white, like against colored backdrops. So yeah, so we had thought, well, if we ever do that, now again, I don't know how I'd get this in the book, but we had thought it might be kind of interesting if we almost did like a reverse Wizard of, like, if they have to sneak into territory, the physical landscape is all black and white. So like when they like cross over a border, they like cross into black and white the same way like Dorothy walks out into color. We had talked about that. So that's not like cool. Confirmed, but that's something we had talked about. So yeah, you're not far off. Like, it's definitely, the mobsters are, there are Tommy guns, there are fedoras, there are suits. Yeah.
I love it. It. Just the smell of garlic permeate the air in their territories. Their constant accordion music. Okay. I'm calming down. But that was just like, I loved it. And it was in italics too. So it made me feel like she had a certain opinion of them as well, which added to me going like, okay, what's the deal with this?
I can tell you that that all that means is just like, what are they doing here? Like, geographically, they are a long way from where they're supposed to be. So like, vampians make kind of, because like the world is set up in that like the further, like the West is more fantasy, steampunk, like older world type of genres, and then the further the East, the further west that you go, it becomes more modern. Like, basically the Phantasarians rule the West. Sorry, rule the East. I keep doing that. The Phantasarians basically are the kind of dominate the Eastern. I don't know why I keep doing that. The Eastern side, and then the mechs kind of dominate the West.
Okay.
So.
Okay, that's interesting. So like the sun rising and beginning in one spot, and then. Okay, interesting. And it's all one planet, right? Like,
yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's all one planet. It's kind of like the same sort of, I modeled it based after a lot of like our own history and sort of as far as like Western expansion. Like, the more modern it gets, it's like, because of like the mechs have a lot of American influence. I'll just say that.
I sensed this. Yes.
So, yeah.
So let's see. There's a moment where Sarah pretends to like lunge for her dagger to like kind of like freak him out, which I like. I just really like how not seriously she is taking him, and how like low-key irritated she clearly is, but she's trying to turn it into a joke to like keep it from really getting to her, because I identify with that coping mechanism quite a lot. And she says, I've held a grudge.
I love Sarah.
Yeah, she's really fun.
Yeah, I like her.
I've held a grudge against all the other tribes for a very long time. And when he, like, this is the moment where I keep wanting to say Legren. I know that you've told me. Legren. I need to picture it as a J in my head, and then I'll be fine instead of a G. Legren.
That was the original spelling.
Oh my God.
The original spelling was Lejrin. So it changed.
I'm not trying to criticize the spelling of it at all, because there are plenty of names where the letters of things like are just pronounced in a different way than what your instinct tells you. Like Jeffrey.
Yeah.
Geoff. Like, who decide? And then we have, of course, the Jeff, which is so much more like whatever. That's one of the names that I always pull out when I'm trying to talk about like our language not making any sense, is Jeffrey.
Well, no, and one of the only reasons that I didn't lean on that original spelling for Ledrin was because I thought it looked too elfin. Because originally it was a name I'd had stored in the back of my head for a possible elven character at some point in some story to be written someday, maybe. But I liked the name on now Ledrin, but it looked too elven, and he's not an elf. So
gotcha. Okay, interesting. Because now I'm picturing it with the J, and I can see what you mean. Okay, so this is when he says something about how the Onium was last seen in their territory. Oh, okay, so that means we must have taken it, right? And he's sort of taken aback by this like attitude towards the theory. Like, it just seems like such a given to him that they must be behind this, that they're like Lesrin's sort of derisive response is like, it's different than just an outright denial. No, we had nothing to do with it. More like, oh yeah, okay, dumb. I guess you're falling for this dumb shit too. Like, which I kind of enjoy, because I feel like that is something that would be more effective to convincing me that I was wrong about something, is a person reacting. And basically, anytime you try and insinuate that I'm stupid, it's going to get my attention, because that's not something people tell me too often. And don't get me wrong, I have my dumbass moments, but they're infrequent enough that when they're pointed out, I'm like, oh, well, shit.
And this is, I will say, this is not the first time that Raymond's ever been called out in life, but this is the first time he's ever really interacted with somebody other than a mech before. Right. So he's being called out for his own cultural identity, which is something he has never experienced ever. So yeah, so he's completely like, I don't know what to do with that. And yeah, they're reacting in a way that he was not prepared for.
Yeah, so this is, for the record, we don't have the Onium, and as such, we don't understand it any more than you do. And says, you eat, sleep, and fight when commanded. Direct orders are the law. Those orders define the truths by which you are to live, force you to base your entire view of a person or a whole group based solely on information you've been fed. So ask yourself, how do we gain? How does our perpetually lying to you and everyone else benefit us? It's made us a mutual target for the rest of the world, and yet I've seen no good come of that. Have you? And Riemann just straight does not have an answer for this, and pretty much just dodges the question entirely. Like, he just chooses to not really address it at all, which is that is one of those things that drives me the most bananas when I'm arguing with somebody, is when they choose to like take a totally different tack and not actually respond to what you just said. And I really wanted, because he starts to bring up something about the council, and I really wanted Lesrin to be like, no, answer me. You didn't answer the question. Nothing. That's what, isn't it? Yes. Okay, now we can move on. But Lesrin is clearly a more patient soul than I.
Ledrin is insanely patient. When he has his moments, like every now and then, but it's like when he loses his patience, he really loses it. But at the same time, like, yeah, that's something that I really wanted Ledrin to have, is like a really almost unexplainable sense of patience sometimes.
And it's interesting later when they're talking about this again, and he says something about like, well, let's say but somebody just gives it back. Then what?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Reman's initial response is, well, then the wars are over and everything goes back to normal. And he's like, does it? Because this is a permanent resentment that, like, unless whoever took it is, like, taken to task for having done that and kept from the whole, like, cycle of handing it around again, there's always going to be this, like, simmering resentment under the surface. There's always going to be, like, this rivalry that starts to, like, gain traction. Things are not going to be the same regardless of where it is at this point. The damage is kind of done. And now we have to figure out how to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. Like, a lot of people have died at this point. Like, a lot. Like, there have been, I mean, wars have happened. You know, there have been people and kids that have, I mean, 5 years, that's enough to affect a generation, you know? Like, it's not much, but in the grand scheme of things, yeah, like that, there's just, yeah, there's too many things have happened. Yeah, I enjoyed writing that section a lot, actually.
Yeah, well, and it is like, you know, it's really what gets sort of hammered home is how childlike Reman's understanding of everything has been. You know, he's been, and that's the way that being in a sort of military operation has to work in order to get people to obey orders, in order to get people to, like, wholeheartedly endorse when you can't have shades of gray. You can't have, well, you know, I mean, they have their points, but really in the end, you have to make them the bad guys. You have to make this the goal. And that's kind of it. Like, it doesn't really work otherwise. So,
well, in the whole, the ends justify the means thing,
right.
You know, it's like, it's about the O'Neill. We have to find the O'Neill. Like, you have to give them, like, an objective and yeah. But I also, like, it was interesting working on it. I feel like it works on, like, a big, like, cultural, militaristic level, but it also kind of, like, it speaks, I think, a little bit to, and this happened inadvertently, but I know for me that kind of speaks to, I think, what happens on a micro level. Like, if you've had something happen with another person, just like between two people, you know, that's kind of, I think, the process you have to go through with forgiveness, right? Like, just on a personal level sometimes. So it's like, you know, and it works on both scales.
And it's like, there's all kinds of goals that we set for ourselves that we act like once we attain this, everything's fine. And it's just so, you know, if I reach this level in my savings account, if I lose this amount of weight, if I get this certain job, if I'm able to move to this particular city, all of a sudden my life will be fine. And it's just, it is a lovely idea, and it's comforting in its way because of how simple it is. But it's never true. You know, that's never how it works. So you wind up moving, and you're still you with all of the same garbage baggage that you had in the other city that you still have to deal with. And
yeah,
he's starting to see that a little bit. Like, it's breaking through. He does not want to hear it, but he's a smart enough guy that once somebody, like, poses this to him, he does see the logic of it and understands. It takes a while, though. Like, even by the end of these 5 chapters, as much as he seems to get that, it still has not convinced him to join up with Lejren. Like, he is too, I mean, that's essentially asking him to, like, betray the group that he's with, the mechs, right? Like, taking up with the actual enemy as far as he sees. That's not only something that he's, like, agreeing to do himself, but it's also, like, going to be affecting, like, his reputation and how others see him, I would think. And that's a big deal, right?
Yeah, I think that's certainly how he sees it at this point. And I think that that's something that he wrestles with, is, like, even if his perspective on it changes, he knows that's how everyone that he knows back home will see it. That's how it will, you know, what will it look like both to people that I know, but also to just publicly, what is it going to do? And he really struggles with that, especially, again, I don't know. He mentions his sister in a couple times in these first couple chapters, but her influence over him is his older sister, Jenda, her influence is very significant in his life. Yeah,
at one point he's like, what would she do? How would she handle this? So clearly it's like she's a badass and he wants to also be a
Oh,
badass.
yeah.
So,
Oh yeah. And and this is not an insult. I actually really like Riemann as a character a lot, and I kind of feel like, again, to use like a Harry Potter metaphor, if Jenda's a Gryffindor, Riemann is definitely more of like a Hufflepuff.
gotcha.
And I have huge admiration for that. So it's kind of like he, she is definitely more of like the hardened soldier type, and he looks up to that, and that's kind of been his example his whole life. And so so he's constantly like, what would she do? And like, all right, I need to use her as like my role model. But he doesn't have her there to ask. So,
yeah.
He's like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So he has to kind of figure it out on his own.
So here comes a part, and again, I'm not sure if you can tell me this, if it's spoiler or not. But this was, so he's talking about the blast from the missiles, the initial thing that he was sent to analyze. And Lejren says there were no survivors except me. And Riemann's like, yeah, that's not possible. Like, mm-hmm. And he says I think the reason I'm alive is because the onium itself interfered. And then he takes this like patch off of his eye, and his eye is glowing and streaked with blue. The light sparkled under the skin like phosphorescent strips of energy, like live circuitry, but not like cyborgs. Is he Mr. X?
Do you want? Yeah, I can spoil that.
Don't tell me.
No, I can.
Don't
I can,
tell me.
No,
don't
he's not.
It. Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry.
Because Mr. X's color was red, like when it got into his eye.
Yeah.
So he's saying that he thinks the onium interfered, which is to say that whatever like happened surrounding that blast, the onium was present for it, I guess. So that means that they either like know who took it and had been zeroing in on that person, or it was there and they weren't aware that it was there until it was like too late. And they thought that the fight was going to be about something else.
There's also kind of an underlying thing there of because the onium is sentient, there's also a sense of like there's sort of a thing there of like, well, we also don't really know what happened. And the only thing powerful enough to spare somebody from death would be the onium. Mm-hmm. So that has to be what happened. That has to be the reason that I'm still alive.
Gotcha.
So there's part of that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
it's sort of like a God aspect of just like, I guess God has a plan for me and kept me safe. Like, okay.
Yeah. Because it is kind of the closest thing that they have to in this world, in this universe. It's the only thing, it's the closest thing they have to an actual deity.
Interesting. I'm really okay. Then there comes a line that I really liked. He's like staring at this guy's eye, just like, what the fuck? And he's got goosebumps and is just kind of creeped out. At a loss for words, he looked between Cythera and Lejren, trying to decipher a meaning. They both just stared back, waiting. Typical Phanasarians, all cryptic drama rather than straight answers, which I really enjoyed a lot. Have you watched Westworld?
No.
Okay. There's a character in that I almost said this exact line about just last night, because there's a character who like shows up and fucks things up. Like he messes with people's heads and just does shit like that. And I was just like, another cryptic fucking remark. Thanks for nothing. So yeah, they don't tell him anything really about what this means, or, because his assumption again is, oh, okay, well then you do have it. And so there's like, well, fuck, guy, come on, are you not listening at all? She's so annoyed.
Mm-hmm. Well, I also kind of feel like I do kind of feel like that's like if you put like a sci-fi character and a fantasy character in the same room, I do kind of feel like that would be the science fiction reaction to fantasy at large. Like,
That's
oh
true.
my gosh, would you just please, like, talk in complete sentences? Just like, it has there's a bit of a Han Solo influence with that. Like the whole, I prefer a straight fight to all the sneaking around. Like there's a little bit of that in there. Like that idea of like, can we not be metaphoric for once? Can we just tell me what's going on,
Yeah, I feel for him on that. Like, I mean, there are times where I enjoy being cryptic, but it is always because I'm leading up to actually just saying the thing. Like, it's me just like liking to toy with something first and then being straightforward. So it seems like if that's like your default setting is just being cryptic and leaving it there and letting people come to their own conclusions, nah, that drives me nuts also, man. So I feel you.
Which is also then leads directly to Cythera's reaction, which is like, oh, you're not paying attention. So they feed on each other's frustration.
You don't have the onium, but it mysteriously reappeared for a few seconds to save your life. And again, he doesn't answer this question. Like, of course, that's not what happened. But I just really wanted Lejren to just be like, no, here's my explanation. But no, it's more of him moving and realizing that he's really hurt and getting distracted talking about what they did to him. And that he was shot with an arrow made out of a particular metal that he had a really bad reaction to. Which is interesting because like there's a whole mythology with like elves and fairies being allergic to iron. And it's like a reversal of that because it's elven metal. And he's sort of allergic.
Yeah, that's interesting. That I never even thought of that. That's really curious. Because I like that. I love that observation because I would never like. I just didn't put that together. But I remember though, I always wanted magic to be like a biological thing, like it's an actual like thing, and that's where like why Riemann can smell it all the time, like that it has that stench, and that he's like biologically opposed to it. Like it's so ingrained in him that like he it smells awful, and then it affects him physically, almost like a poison, but not quite.
Yeah, I found that really interesting because obviously I don't think that anybody who like is magical and can handle magic is smelling this like burned tire smell that he seems to be like. Nobody's going to want to live like that. So it clearly does not smell this way to them or have this effect on them. And I'm curious to find out if like he ever describes to them what it smells like to him and they're kind of surprised by that, because I'm not sure how much they know about how others experience it, So this is when he basically like says to Lejren, like, I know that you're going to try and keep me here. And Lejren's like, nah, you can go. I mean, you shouldn't because you are fucked up, but if you want, you can. And go ahead and try and stand up. And he tries and it doesn't go super well. He almost faints, really. And another elf comes in and she helps him like shift around all of his like dressings and everything. So now he has a sling. Talina, is that her name?
Yeah.
She's super strong too, despite looking very delicate, and really just kind of handles him, which I enjoy. And I love because he has like runes on his dressings, which are supposed to help with the healing. And he looks down and says, "Elven runes, you said?" And Lejren says, "Powerful, aren't they? Elves or the runes?" Lejren just smiled, and Riemann found he was grinning back. Did I just share a joke with a Phantasarian? How, sir? How could you have humor? Knock it off. There's no joking matter here. And this is the first time that he gets like led out of here, and the like effect of magic on him is really strong. Magic, layer upon layer of it, slammed into him. His eyes watered and he shut them hard, fighting the urge to gag. Nearly a full minute passed before he could breathe easily. The shock of the magic stench slowly wore off, and he adjusted to the biting cold. When he could finally open his eyes again to take in his surroundings, he realized that his plan was thwarted before it had begun. He couldn't see a damn thing. There were lanterns lit and torches all around, and he could make out all the people, but the blackness of night seeped into every unlit space like spilled ink. He exhaled, but couldn't tell if his breath was visible. It was cold enough, but there wasn't enough light to reflect it. From what he could see, they stood in some kind of center square. So, is this magical dark?
No, it's just that between this and also like what he experiences when he first lands, when he like the silence is so jarring to him too. It's that he's somebody who's never really lived out of an urban area. He's never been around a place that's not lit with lots of lights. Yeah. So it's this idea that he's just not used to the absence of sound and of man-made things. He's so not used to it. In a lot of ways that like, I think even some of us, like if we go camping, like it's, I know even for me sometimes, like when there's no moon, for example, like it's a new moon and you walk outside and it's like, it's dark. Mm-hmm. Like it just, sometimes it can surprise me how dark something can seem if like you're in an area that's not particularly, just like, a back road, without streetlights,
Yeah, like we live in sort of a rural area, and there's a street light that like we don't have that many street lights. We have like one every full block on the corners, and one like I like to take walks in the evening, and one of them has gone out, and I listen to the occasional spooky podcast, and I made the mistake of doing that the other night, and it was on as I came up to it because it kind of goes in and out. It was on, and then like as I came up, it went out, and just the utter black. I was just like,
"Oh man!"
One of those moments of just like, you know what? I'm having a real like primordial reaction to being in this darkness, like this real sort of lizard. What do they say? Lizard brain, sort of like time to go, time to run, time to sprint the fuck out of here. So. Yeah. All right. I got you. Not magical, just sort of magical in that it's brand new to him.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he's being shown to this other place that he's going to stay, and he finds out later that this was the home of somebody who is now dead, which I was surprised at the reaction that he had to that. He really was like, I'm sleeping in the bed of someone who was deceased. And I'm like, well, they didn't die in the bed. Relax. It's okay. But they have assessed very correctly, evidently, that he is not somebody who has slept in tents and made fires and, read by the light of a torch. Like, so they're trying to give him the better accommodations to ease his transition, which is very considerate and better than he deserves, probably. So I hope that he appreciates that.
Yeah, they're really trying super hard not to spook him. They're trying to like ease him in. Like, let's take this slow,
And when he finally gets left alone here, he's sort of getting himself settled, and he like moves the nightstand in front of the door because there's no lock on it. He expected that when Lejren left that he would lock it behind him, and he does not do that. So his response is, well, if you're not going to put a lock, then I'm going to try and put a lock. So he moves the nightstand in front of it, and he opens the drawer, and there is his pistol sitting there. And he's really startled. Like, the fact that they are trusting him enough to give him his weapon, as much as he knows the weapon wouldn't do a ton of good against everybody that's there, it's the comfort of having it, and the fact that they decided to consciously make the choice to do that really is like gives him pause. And he winds up tucking it under his pillow like a precious baby, and sleeping until like noon the next day. And they had started to actually grow concerned that maybe he had died in the middle of the night because they keep knocking and he's not answering and there's something in front of the door so they can't get in easily. So I kind of enjoyed that he like really, they're trying to keep him alive. Like the fact that he has died would be very inconvenient to them.
Yeah.
So, and this is when we meet, how do you say his name? Zanet? Zatar, that's right.
Zatar, yeah.
I
love Zatar.
Yeah.
I love that character so much.
Zatar seems very good-natured. Like somebody who just seems to be in a good mood most of the time, or at the very least knows how to make a joke out of most things.
A big influence of that character. I don't know if you're familiar with David Eddings' work, the Belgariad or the Malorian, but there's a character in both of those series named Silk, and he's all well, I don't want to, that's a spoiler, never mind. But the for those books, not for this one, but Silk is one of my favorite characters that I've ever read ever, and he's your typical rogue, you know, and so Zatar borrows a lot from Silk.
Okay. Yeah, Zatar is really like, I think the most effective thing for handling somebody like Riemann is to not take them too seriously. And this is the exact recipe that he needs. And yeah, so he's like, so it's time for the midday meal. So we were thinking, and he's like, what? Midday? So he heads out with him, and he is talking about Lejrin's idea in this really vague way. And we find out that his idea is that he thinks we can achieve peace without even getting the I'm forgetting the word again. Omnium? Onium. Without even getting it back. Because he seems to feel that they have grown like dependent on it. Like, it's not actually the thing that's granting us peace. It's almost causing us to rely on it to the point that when it's gone, it causes such havoc that it might not be worth it in the end, which is a really interesting theory. It clearly has some kind of calming power because Mr. X, who seems like a pretty bad dude, almost just stopped and stared slack-jawed at it and like forgot what he was even doing here. Calming power does not equal good, though. Like, it's like a giant Xanax or something, you know? Like,
well, the other thing is that the Onium is also what has, like, it communes with each culture, and like it kind of in different ways depending on who it's with. But they're dependent on it because it's sort of the cause, or at least it's the catalyst for what made them all become so different. So like it's where the mechs kind of got their technology from. It's where, it's kind of where magic comes from. It's where and the reason why there are three Brisbane brothers that found it is because those three are basically all of the tribes basically come from those three. So Thanasarians, mechs, and Nenjin, who I think, is in the first five chapters.
Very end of the fifth chapter, yeah.
That's right, yeah. So you don't really know too much about them yet, but those three kind of are what then all the rest of the tribes branch from. Because if you think about it, it's different variations of like magic and sort of the sword and sorcery genre, and then others are like basically different forms of genres with firepower, and science, ostensibly more modern. So, and the Nenjin are kind of unto themselves still. So, so part of that is that they're dependent on the Onium because it literally fuels their cultural and technological and or magical development as their culture, you know, within their own culture. So it's kind of like, if it's gone, it means like, does our evolution just kind of stop? You know, something I had toyed around with was, if the Onim is gone, does that mean like science is gonna go like electricity and technology, is that gonna suddenly like just stop working, like stop functioning? You know, is magic gonna go away? And it hasn't. So they're kind of, you know, I don't think that's actually in the novel anywhere. I think I toyed around with putting it in there somewhere, but yeah, I don't think I actually worked it in anywhere. But that's kind of the idea. So the fact that it hasn't means some level of it is either still there, or it never was totally, they weren't totally dependent on it from the beginning. You know, that there's something else going on, and that's kind of what Ledrin's picking up on. Like, maybe there's another way that we can either advance ourselves, or that we can just coexist.
Right.
You know?
I mean, it does seem like a really, what's the word I want? A really delicate system to have the entire world's existence and cultural identities wrapped around something that it may have been around for like thousands of years. I'm not sure exactly the like timeline for it, but it is an object that like one would imagine will not be around forever. Maybe it will, and maybe they believe that it will because it's so powerful that it seems like it's eternal, and that could be possible. But it, you know, when it's its natural state and it's a crystal, that's a physical object that has its, you know, beginning and end. And that just seems like a bad system. It's like they're relying on fossil fuel, except that it's like even more subject because it's not a huge like supply around the world that everybody can have their own weird access to. It's one single source that everybody is solely dependent on. And that is a problem. That is not a sustainable model.
And Ledrin kind of even makes reference to that a little bit in the chapter before when they talk about how hostilities have started. It's kind of like, you know, he's basically saying, I could already kind of sense some rumblings that like, yeah, it's not sustainable. Like it's, you know, we were gonna get here eventually anyway. Like it, you know, this is a problem. It's not. It's we need. So now we're here. Like we're here now. Let's figure something else out.
Yeah. So that's interesting. Okay, that's kind of a cool idea. So they're in the middle of eating, and oh my God, Riemann is, despite like starting to soften a little bit on what they're intending to do with him, because he kept on being like, they're just lulling me into a false sense of security and then they're going to kill me later. And I'm just as I'm going, why? He's going, but why? And I'm like, yes, Riemann, that does not make any sense. He is also like deciding that he's going to try and observe as much as he can. He's going to spy as much as he can. And as he is like walking through everything with Zatar, he asks like how many troops they have stationed here. And Zatar's like, troops, dude, that's not what this is at all. This is for refugees because I don't know if you noticed, but there's a fucking war and people can't stay chilling in their houses while you're dropping missiles on them and shit. So they need to go somewhere. And like, this truly does not seem to have occurred to him ever at all. Like, bless his heart. So, and he even still, when he's told this by Zatar, there's still a part of him that's like, yeah, well, maybe, I don't know. But then once they sit down and eat, and he's like looking around and he sees like plenty of old people and children and folks in like varying levels of like, shabbiness of clothing and whatnot. He starts to be like, yeah, all right, I guess these probably aren't troops. I'm like, dude, you need to calm down. He's so paranoid.
So paranoid.
Oh my God.
Mhm.
I love this when we're exactly what I said, a harmless community in rural Fantasaria with no ties to the bigger goings on in the war. There's no military intel for you to gain here. Riemann shifted uncomfortably. Was he that predictable? Just because he was a mech? Of course, it could have been a lie, just like the rest of it. Oh, Riemann, you were so close. So close, buddy. Come on.
It can't possibly be that. No, no way.
Almost. All right, so we could give you a tent, but shot in the dark, I'm guessing you're not used to rustic living. Like, he doesn't like that they know what he's like, which I also identify with. Like, nobody wants to be predictable, and nobody wants to feel like they're such an open book, because it makes you very easy to manipulate. And that's not a good feeling to have about yourself. Everybody just knows.
Well, he's also like, the night before, he's like, oh, I can peg everything because you're Fantasarians, and then everything, so many of his predictions turn out to be not true. But he's like, no, I'm allowed to be able to read you. You're not allowed to be able to read me. That's not how this is supposed to go. And it's like,
yeah, it's almost like he feels like,
oh,
we're gathering all the intel on you, but the mechs remain a mystery. Like, I'm pretty sure that's not how information works. But okay, sure.
Yeah.
So then comes his conversation with Lejren about the forming a resistance. And he's like, well, isn't that what everybody's doing? And Lejren's like, no, not against specific nations. I'm not trying to form a resistance to like fight back. I'm trying to form a resistance to war, period. Which is a really interesting way of putting it. Like the council, but start fresh with people who haven't been corrupted by power and politics, people who have seen the cost of the wars up close, as many tribes represented as possible by anyone who is willing to listen. And Riemann's listening to this and then being like, well, all right, why don't you go talk to some tribes then? And he's like, hi. How has that been working for me so far? Do you not see what's happening right now?
Yeah.
I love how simplistic Riemann is with some stuff. It's just like, he just doesn't think it through, because in Riemann's mind, it's clear that he is not part of the group of everyone else. Like, the mechs are a very special thing that's all separate. So when he talks about getting together and talking to tribes, like, Riemann doesn't even put the mechs in that category mentally, it feels like, they're just outside of it all in his mind, because they're the right ones.
Yeah.
Probably.
And
yeah. How many have you got so far? Lejren, however, did not answer, but smiled feebly and arched his brows at Riemann. You've got to be kidding me. Lejren shrugged. I must start somewhere. I'm a mech, Riemann howled, incredulous. Yes, everyone seems rather focused on that. Oh, that's funny.
Which the indication is that, like, he's probably gotten some pushback from everybody in his camp there. Like, dude's a mech, like Lejren. Is this a good idea?
It's like when Daenerys wears sellswords and everybody's like, girl, what you doing? No. Bad plan. Except that he's not like being hired, but it's sort of the same, like, you don't want to ally yourselves with folks like that. So mechs seem like you said, I'm picturing that they're the frat boys of this like planet, weirdly.
Not so much. It's more just the fact that they are the two biggest cultures on the planet. Like, it would be a lot easier to, like, the idea being like, it would have been a lot easier if Legend had started with like a steampunk, or like a clockwork, or or even like, with the Vikings, or even a Wrangler, or someone from their kind of neck of the woods, so to speak.
Gotcha.
Like somebody who's kind of closer, who's like, I kind of understand how Phantasarian culture works. Like, okay, I'm a little resistant, but like, I'm not completely diametrically biologically opposed or different from you. Like, Ledrin's kind of like, I'm going to just shoot for the highest possible goal that I can. Like it's and it's a thing of like, and this actually does come up a little later. I don't remember which chapter it's in, but the idea of why Riemann doesn't just go away after this, it does come up again later. There's a little bit more light shed on why Riemann later. But the idea being that it's like, I'm like, even if like I were to join, who's going to take it seriously?
Mm-hmm.
Like, who's going to believe like I'm actually a mech, or that I'm actually here because I want to be? Like, it's, our cultures do not.
Yeah.
Like, we just butt heads. Like they're so, far apart that it's like ridiculous just in concept.
That seems to be what draws Ledrin to Riemann, because he says, if you join up with us, that will make people think that anything is possible, which simultaneously like makes total sense, but also there's like a like bit of shade thrown in there, like getting one of you guys, well, then we know that we can walk on water practically. So yeah, and
that's that kind of like inadvertent, it's like that almost inadvertent, like, for lack of a better word, racism, right? Because he doesn't, I don't think Ledrin realizes that there's shade there. Like, he just doesn't see it that way, right? The same way that, like, Riemann has said a couple things like that. And it's like, okay, guys. Like, yeah.
As far as this, like, between the two of them, he is speaking the language that Riemann understands by saying that. That, like, I don't even know that Riemann would take that as an insult so much as being like, well, no, yeah, I see your point. Like, it's everybody from the outside being like, whoa, guys, all right, chill out.
Yeah.
So I love this too, when he explains that the whole process would be laced with mistrust and underlying stifled resentment. And you think you can prevent that by talking, having one conversation with a collection of gullible misfits, which is just such a like succinct description of what, and Ledrin does not argue at all with that and try and be like, well, no need to say it like that. He just goes, well, how else would I do this? Literally, do you have another idea? Do you? Because pretty sure that's it. These are my options.
Like, I'm listening,
And he says the council became misguided and power hungry before even the wars. Now they're riddled with hate and fear. The Phantasarian royalty won't take us seriously. Cythera's parents tried already years ago. They would not hear it then, and they won't hear it now. Reaching out to them is futile. Then what about other tribes? Ah, yes, because just convincing you has been so easy. And then talks about the Onium, and not once since the brothers Brisbane discovered the Onium have we considered that we are all people of Cabathan. Is that how you say it? Or Cabathan? Cabathan?
Cabathan.
And that's the name of the planet as a whole, right? Okay,
yeah.
Cool. And Riemann is like, well, I do agree with you, but this just seems, and this is my favorite. I like stopped and highlighted this and was like, I'm sorry, excuse me. Okay, but the problem is, even if you do get some people's attention, the wars aren't just going to stop. If anything, you may attract too much notice. He suppressed a shudder, thinking of the Vampians, orcs, gargoyles, period, and pirates. What's that now? We got pirates. Do they have eye patches? Do they have parrots? Do they have parrots? Help me, Robin. Do they have parrots?
At least one probably does. Yeah, sure. I'm playing with genre tropes, so
fun.
probably.
This is fun.
Yeah. I will warn you, you don't actually see any pirates in this book.
That's okay. I just like knowing they're there. I just like having that.
Yes.
Like somewhere.
There are pirates. Yeah. No, I love me some pirates. There's definitely pirates in this.
I really feel like pirates are better doled out in like implication rather than actually being there. So I kind of like, I like it that you don't see them in a way. Like knowing that this is a world that they exist in is sort of, I don't know. That's almost better for me. So this is when Lejren is just like, all right, listen, we've talked enough. You've been here a minute. You're going to need to make a decision here now because Rhiannon tries to be like, just go ahead without me and then I'll figure it out. I just need more time. And Lejren's like, we cannot start without you. Like you're the whole foundation that this is going to be built on, is having been able to persuade a mech to join up with us is like the thing. So without you deciding, we're just in stasis here and we can't afford to be wasting this time and just sitting here. Which no pressure.
Yeah.
It's been like a day, right? Like that just seems unreasonable.
It hasn't even been 12 hours, I don't think, since he first got there.
Good God. Sir. Give him some time.
And he's injured and he's slightly feverish. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So he starts working on a little bit of like solo project stuff where he's messing with tech that he's got to try and like create an alarm system for his house. And Lejren wants him to, what is it that he tries to get him? Would it be possible to set up some kind of security system with these devices? And by security system, I thought he meant for like his like, had like tent area, like his specific area, but he means like for this whole community, basically. And it turns out to be not a moment too soon. Initially, Riemann tries to be like, definitely can't do that. No way. This won't work. Like, first of all, I would need power sources. I can't link up to satellites, which are like required for this. It's not going to work. And Lejren's just like, well, if it's not going to work, then show me that it's not going to work. You don't get to just say that it's not going to work and not actually even try and then just be done. So he goes ahead and tries, and lo and behold, it does work, which startles the hell out of him. Like I love when he's talking to Zatar and he's like, who'd have thought? And Zatar's like, well, Lejren, apparently. And he's so irritated, Riemann. She's like, yeah, I know. He doesn't say it, but that's essentially what happens right there. Just like, yeah, shut up, whatever.
There's also like an underlying thing there, I think, of Riemann. I think in general, Riemann underestimates his own individual capabilities. Like, I know that he really like puts all of the stock in the mech culture, but I don't think he relies particularly. He doesn't invest a lot in his own capabilities. Like, he doesn't think of himself much as his own entity. Like, he's always thinking about like, what would Jemda do? Like, he's thinking about his influences and outside resources other than himself. And I think this is like a really good example of like Lejren's like, well, why don't you give it a try? Like, you're saying you need all these things, but what if you can do this thing? Like,
yeah.
What if that's a thing you can do? And that ends up being a very like a thing kind of through the whole book.
A theme.
And that's something like I put a lot of like my own stuff in that because that's something that I struggle with a lot. So it's, it was really easy to put that into Riemann's character because I'm like, that's a thing I think, I struggle with. I think a lot of us struggle with that, So.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a little moment where Riemann is going to see Lejren later after realizing that this was successful after all, where he sees the reunification. That sounds so formal. A man and woman being reunited after the man had been off fighting.
Oh. Yeah.
And
Homecoming.
Okay, yeah, that's better.
Yeah.
And he's like sort of startled by how moved he is by this moment of seeing the two of them, but he's standing and staring, and the Phantasarian man like stops and looks at him and is like really irritated that one of the enemy is standing right there in the street witnessing a very personal moment and does not care for it. And Riemann seems taken aback at the reaction that he gets from this guy, but then when he stops and thinks how he'd react if he saw a Phantasarian in the street when he's at home, he's like, oh yeah, that would not be okay at all. So I like that he at least has a moment of being able to like put himself in the shoes of this person and has the self-awareness to be able to do that, which more people should work on. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
That's a thing that we could use more of.
Yeah.
So when he and Lejren are talking again about like the need for Riemann to make his decision really quickly, they are interrupted by the buzz of Riemann's like wrist comm thing, which is letting him know that there are intruders, that the security system is going off. So he expects for Lejren to like alert everybody and like all men to arms kind of reaction, and is really startled when homie just goes and grabs a sword and runs out there alone. And it's just like, I'm sorry, excuse me? What are you doing? Get some backup, get some help. And Lejren is just like, I'm not going to set everybody off into a panic. You said that there's what, 2 of them? We don't need that right now. That's not necessary. I love the difference in their reactions. One of them is used to like the militarized, like, you know, I'm sending a squadron out, team 6, like, and the other one's just like, no, I'm pretty sure I can handle 2 by myself. It's fine. You know what? I got some time.
Yeah. Well, and again, that speaks to like, you know, Riemann's sense of like, no, we need like, he's so like, no, we need the team. Like, yeah, like, but Legends like, no, it's, I can do it myself. Yeah.
So Riemann again, this dude gets snuck up on a lot. Like he always thinks that he's got it under control and then is always wrong. Riemann continued forward, confident of their advantage, when something smashed against his back. Pitched forward, rifle spun out of his grasp into the sea of dark grass. Riemann rolled and sprung up onto his feet, trying to get his bearings. A woman dressed in all black silk garb and sashes of blue wrapped around her waist cartwheeled toward him, but he scurried backward away from her and the glowing lights from his fallen gun. Undeterred, she leapt forward still, closed the distance, and landed in front of him. So she's continuing to kick and fight as he notices that there are silver chains around her wrists. She raised her arms again, this time in wide, graceful circles. The tiny symbols engraved in the chains began to glow bright orange, and so did her irises. Nenjin, he realized, as flames burst from her fists. Perfect. And that's the end of chapter 5.
Yep.
So that's pretty badass. I would very much like to do cartwheels and then have my fists light up into flames. Please and thank you.
Yeah. The Nenjin are pretty cool. I like them a lot.
Yeah, that sounds rad. So yeah, that's the end of chapter 5. That's actually perfect timing. Like we're at just over an hour and a half here, which is like, I think the amount of time. But yeah, this was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. And
I'm glad.
Is there anything like that you want to mention about it beyond what we've talked about so far?
Not especially. I mean, I've already mentioned like that it's technically this is a companion novel to the web series, which is in development, and there's a lot of media. Like we have a couple of videos on the Genre Wars website and on my website as well, which are about sort of the origin of the web series project and how we, how Justin and I developed the story together and how it evolved into what it is now. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I don't really know what's coming next. I'm about to do NaNoWriMo, so I'm kind of about to like turn Resistance Rising off, in my brain and focus on a new story. But yeah, I love this world a lot. So it's fun to be, it is self-published. It's an indie novel. So, I'm sharing it where and when I can. So this was a lot of fun to actually talk about it, at length, at longer length than just like when I'm at, like when I had a table at Baltimore Comic-Con and that like, and I've done little things like that. And, it's very quick. It's like, here's the pitch. And then like people either walk away with it or they don't. Most of the time they walk away with a copy. But the idea is like, it's only a little bit of discussion. So this was a lot of fun to talk about.
This is like, cause I'm in the middle of trying to write something and I have another friend who's also, and we have like periodic meetings where we just like spitball with each other for a couple of hours. And it really is crazy how much it opens your brain up, because when you are thinking about just the like overall themes, you get focused on the same through lines over and over again. And you keep having to repeat the same like themes and whatever. But I really get what you mean, getting to discuss like, especially when it's something that you've created and having a fresh eye on it is just always such a different, like, so yeah, my pleasure. Yeah. Fun.
Yeah. It's fun.
And definitely give me the links to the videos that you were talking about, in case people are interested in checking that out to get more information on all of that. But I will be including that stuff in the show notes for those of you who are listening. And I feel like there was another thing that I wanted to mention to you or ask you about. Well, do you want to plug your site? What is the address?
Sure. My website is just robincfarrell.com. That's ROBINCFARRELL. And the Genre Wars website is literally genrewars.tv.
.tv. Okay.
So, and all like all the social media stuff for both of those are on both of those websites.
All right, cool.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for commissioning this. This was really fun. And it was a really good way to start off the first wannabe section of the Spoil Me, which I have not gotten to do yet. And I wasn't sure if anybody would want to do it. I have a wannabe coming up next week, but what it is it's for Veronica Mars, and people purchased the wannabe level and then like convinced Jamie to join me, who is a co-host on the Lost show. So it's not even like the person who commissioned it wanted to be on with me. They wanted me to co-host it with somebody, and they just like managed to swing them into it.
Yeah.
And then I have one for the Vavitch, which is what I call the witch movie that's spelled with 2 V's, next weekend.
Yeah.
But that's the second one of this entire like project beginning, the Spoil Me project. So, all right. Well, thank you everybody so much for listening. Definitely check this out. The link will be in the show notes again, if you want to check it out. And I recommend it. It's a lot of fun. There are secret off-screen pirates, which I feel is important to reiterate, and mobsters. So enough said, really. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.